My name is John Webb O'Rourke. I wouldn't necessarily call myself a community activist, but I suppose over the years with Margaret and Ben and the family here, and indeed with the support of Ballyhowra from Kilfinnan and just over here, Kilmallock has been the benefit of a lot of things positive from the local government, the council. Mr. Pat Daly, the chief executive, is a former executive with Shannon Development in his time, and so we benefited in Kilmallock from close association with the local government. We're now being given the opportunity throughout Limerick City and County to elect a democratically elected mayor, and we're delighted to welcome in Kilmallock John Moran. John is apolitical, but would probably have had a lot of political connections over the years in various guises and significant positions nationally and internationally. And I know I personally am very pleased to recommend John as the person who I think, for lots of reasons, why he should be the democratically elected mayor for the city and county. John has kindly attended with his colleagues tonight. He has a message to give. He's asked questions of me around what I'm involved in, which is probably the delivery of healthcare infrastructure, and I've done so here in Kilmallock, and I'll give a little chat on that later, and I've done it in Croom. And I suppose I'd like to see community healthcare delivery enhanced in the city and county, and I believe there's an opportunity to that, and the knock-on of that is, I believe, less trolleys in the hospital in Limerick. That is the case. People may not believe me when I say it, but I think stronger, more GPs in the community, more delivery of healthcare services leads to a situation where there isn't the necessity to have people going into the hospital, etc. Not being critical of anybody, I just think the rollout of the infrastructure quicker would help that situation. Okay? Without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to John and be inspired what he has to say in the areas that we're going to talk about tonight, and we'll have a little chat afterwards. Okay.
Thanks very much, John. You can, whichever. You might prefer to chill out, grab a cup of tea or something like that if you want. Listen, thanks very much to everybody for coming. And I guess the first thing I want to say is it's really great to be in Kilmallock. I mean, one of the reasons that we came here was that I met John originally in the context of thinking about Limerick as a whole and how the various parts of Limerick come together. And he's a great salesperson in the first place for his local area, which is really impressive. He introduced me to Margaret, who I couldn't ask for a better host in terms of both obviously giving us the holla, and thank you very much for the holla, but actually setting it up, and also again spending time with me over a couple of sort of conversations to help me explain, or to help explain to me what's actually happening in this area and some of the things that a directly elected mayor could actually focus on. So I suppose what we're trying to do tonight is actually the third one. But I want to show you a diagram which I think is probably, I've used this in presentations over and over again. You know, in terms of, there we go, the techie one. So we'll see if I can, there we go. Oops, sorry. This is a diagram I've used for probably now about 7 or 8 years, and I'm not sure it's still any less valid than it is today. And I keep apologizing to Paul Waterford, who should be on the diagram as well at the bottom. But I suppose tonight we're going to be talking about health, and with the government's recent announcements in the context of everything that's going on in UHL, you can see why this is happening. 2 new hospitals announced for Dublin at Cabinet yesterday, while we're in the process of actually losing a hospital potentially in Limerick that we could have kept while the bonds are moving over to their new facility. And that kind of a conversation that needs to happen, with the other thing being that new facilities going into Galway and to Cork, which of course is an improvement because it's at least on the west side of the island. But if I were to capture why we needed directly elected mayor in one picture, I think it is this picture behind me. And ultimately, my great sort of regret was 5 years ago that Cork and Waterford didn't decide to go and have a directly elected mayor as well, because I think we would have been having a very different conversation in these couple of lead-up weeks to the election, because I think there'd be a lot more national focus on it. But more importantly, it would have meant that in a couple of weeks' time, we would then have 3 people who would be representing and able to represent together a very, very large cohort of people who aren't in Dublin. Now, be that as it may, as it's turned out, it is Limerick that's going to drive on with this project. It's a hugely valuable project for Limerick, in my opinion, and we can talk a bit more about that. But it's even more valuable for the country. Earlier today, I was in Rathkeale trying to explain some of the progression that's happened in the country in the last 10 years. And the numbers are striking, because everybody, I think, thinks that Limerick has done a good job and is moving forward. And for example, there have been nearly 30 or 40,000 jobs created here in the last 10 years. And that sounds like a great result until you put it in the context that the country has actually generated about 700,000 jobs. And then you kind of start to think, well, maybe we're not actually doing as well as we should do. And I could go on a lot more. But one of the reasons for me, and this is why this directly elected mayor role is so important, is that we as a country do not give our local representatives the power that they deserve. And I think that directly elected mayor role can start to break down that over-concentration of power and decision-making right in the middle of this big bubble. And to throw another number out, I promise I won't do very many more numbers after this, right? But this is another very impactful statistic. If you think of all the money that the government spend in Ireland, so they collect from tax revenues and everything else that they spend, the people that decide how that should actually be spent, whether it's on a playground in Kilmallock, whether it's over in a new community centre in Atlaca, are actually not people in Limerick. They're people in Dublin, to whom we tend to have to apply to look for the playground, along with people from Carlow and Cavan and everything else. And a lot of the time is actually spent writing up an application note saying this is what Limerick is and where it is, and this is where Atlaca is, because they've never probably ever visited Limerick, let alone Atlaca. And the outcome of that is that 93% of all the money that's spent in Ireland is actually done by decisions in central government, leaving only 7% of the funds to be distributed across all the local authorities in the rest of the country, and including here in Limerick. Now, Denmark is a country that I admire an awful lot for a lot of the stuff that they've done in built economies. It has a very similar economy in some ways to Ireland in size. It has a very large agricultural hinterland, a great agricultural heritage, and is driving on an offshore wind. So you can see the similarities between the two countries. It has Copenhagen, which is a large city, but it also has 2 or 3 other significant cities that are actually bigger by percentage to ours. But 67% of the money that the Danish government distributes across Denmark and spends every year is actually decided not by central government, but by municipalities, by local governments. So think about that in a context of Ireland. That would be 60% of a budget of about 100 billion. That would mean that our local authorities, if we moved to that type of nirvana in my mind, it would mean that our local councils, and hopefully lots of directly elected mayors in a couple of years' time, would have 60 billion more to spend locally in decisions that they would be making about the infrastructure for their communities, about the schools, the playgrounds. And they wouldn't need to be told where Atlaca is or Kilmallock, because they would already know, because they would be operating from offices in Newcastle West and from here in Kilmallock and inside in the city centre. So that is the prize that is there for Limerick if we do a good job in thinking about the directly elected mayor and moving forward that project. And that's why when I talk about this, I spend a lot of my time trying to explain, having been in central government and having done the hard job of national politics and figuring out programs of government, that's why the role is really important in so many aspects that I don't think we understand. Both in terms of setting policy, in terms of figuring out a budget, which is small in the context of what it should be, but nonetheless, about €1 billion goes through the hands of Limerick City Council every year. 300 million or so of that is spent here in Limerick, and they also do another 350 to 400 million of capital projects that they manage, whether it's roads or housing and stuff like that. And so that's a lot of possibility for getting it wrong. In one sense, it's also a lot of possibility and potential, if you can do it well, to save 100,000 here or 200,000 there, which, as we all know in this room, could make a huge difference for communities in terms of the amount of money that triggers when you're dealing with volunteer organisations that are looking for 5,000 or 10,000 to make a huge difference in their communities. Now, against that backdrop, as people know, we've been trying to, I suppose, take the lead as a candidate, and I have the benefit of being an independent candidate in this election. So when we actually talk to people and consult and they tell us what they would like, we don't have to go through a committee or a policy committee up in Dublin to see if it's a good idea or not. We can actually just drive on, and I can just change the policy and say that's what I would like to propose to the Limerick councillors, and if it seems like a good idea to the people in the men's sheds in Rathkeale who know Rathkeale, there's very strong chance it seems like a good idea to me too. And therefore it may be a question of just pushing on or getting funding for it. And in terms of thinking about policy, and I keep saying policy, but in some ways that's what you need to say when you're talking to the people up in Dublin, because that's the way they think. When you're talking to people in communities, I think what they want to hear is what actions are going to be done for us and how does it matter. So there's a translation exercise that we've been going through with these sessions in terms of explaining why it's important that we have these sort of policy statements right, because they lead to the actions. And we've done that over these 4 sessions, and again, we're on number 3 now, and the first 3 are in some ways the real core of what we're trying to say, which is they are all the actions. With the one that we've announced today, we now have in these documents, and I am now committing to deliver 300 separate actions as examples of things that can be done in 5 years. And I've been there and I've done it, and I know the public sector can actually deliver when it is asked to deliver things with clarity and with deadlines. But it needs to have that overall plan that they can work to so that everybody in the office, everybody in the organisation, and indeed all of the other organisations that help Limerick Council to achieve this stuff, all know what the destination we're all trying to go towards. And so we now, with the final session tonight, we will have issued effectively our housing policy and our built environment policy, which will also deal with how we make those places fun to live in, how we do culture, how we do animation. We will have issued our business policy, which we did last week, which is about a more prosperous Limerick, but for everybody. It's about making sure that we don't leave any communities behind. And Limerick has been infamous about leaving communities behind in the past, in the way we've done stuff, and we have to do a lot better on that. But it's also about taking advantage of very, very large opportunities that exist for us in terms of where we're going. And we're going to deal with the more healthy. And those 3 actually fit into this context. So when people ask me what I'm standing for in this election, it's relatively simple in terms of 3 different principles. It is more ambition for Limerick. So I think I will sort of ask more of the government to do for Limerick, but I want Limerick to ask more of itself as well, in terms of setting its sights higher. With the stuff I talked about with the jobs earlier and the number of jobs, let's not be satisfied with that. Let's actually push for higher. We can achieve more, and we have to do that. So we have to have more ambition for ourselves first in terms of allowing it to happen. We will have these 300 actions that are coming in, and they're only examples. I mean, I think I've probably just made it an extra one today after Rathkeale, because the guys did actually come up with a very good idea, which we can change online, and it will be there. But importantly, I think, and all of the consultation we're doing is saying much of the same thing, which is that there's lots of plans in Limerick. There's lots of good ideas in Limerick, but there isn't that sort of rigorous delivery that you need to get. And so we have more delivery, which we will deliver next week in a final speech to wrap all of this up with some of the ways I think we can change things and use the office of the directly elected mayor to make that happen, because recognising that this mayor, whether it's me or indeed anyone else, is working full-time for Limerick for 5 years, which is effectively the kind of term that you typically give a CEO of a very large organization to actually make some significant change and drive a place on. And the team that will come with that mayor to do that are the councillors who will understand what's best for their own areas and will be able to drive forward their own priorities. And then, of course, all of the 1,000+ staff of Limerick Council themselves. Some of whom may have to sort of, because that's what the mayor's prerogative is to agree with the council what the priorities are for those staff for the next 5 years. And this time around, those priorities will reflect what the people have been telling me if I'm lucky enough to be chosen as mayor. And that's what these documents are supposed to actually explain. So going through the 3 sections now just quickly, and then we can do the panel conversation on the third one afterwards. But just it'll give you a framework for this, because what I've discovered in writing this, which is not that surprising, because in some ways this is like a national program for a specific area. It doesn't work if you just do housing. It doesn't work if you just do culture. It doesn't work if you just do health. Every one of these, as I think we'll probably tease out in the conversation later, has a huge interaction with each other. How we build our houses, how we build our homes can lead to loneliness, it can lead to isolation, or it can lead to really vibrant communities where people's mental health and wellness is actually looked after, not by the state, but by neighbours, by their activities, casual interactions in the street, right? And so we set up our moral livability strand as the obvious first one, which is more affordable housing. We're in the middle of a housing crisis, so clearly that has got to be one of the most important priorities. But we want to do that in a way that creates a more desirable Limerick than we currently have. I think we all love Limerick, I certainly do. But we all know the things that could be fixed along the way, and that would make it even more desirable. And we're not topping the leagues for population growth in Ireland. So while Ireland is growing at a very significantly fast rate, we're not doing the same. And there are a lot of reasons for that, but we started with a huge advantage in terms of affordability, which we're losing somewhat as we create more jobs. But we can catch back on the affordability very quickly, I think, as we can describe, and we can talk about it in Q&A if we want later. But more importantly, we need to have this more desirable Limerick that other people want to come to as well. Okay? We want to have, for obvious reasons, a safer or more community-driven Limerick. And I put the two of those together for a reason, because the best security in a community is actually the community. It's people watching out their windows. It's having a structure where people actually have the silent eyes, as they've been referred to, just keeping an eye on what's going on in the street. And so you don't build neighborhoods with just areas of one or the other. You actually build neighborhoods that are mixed, so you get these mixed activities. So this is all stitching together. You clearly want to have way more culture, way more visual and performing arts, but not just to have fun, but because that's what helps mental illness. That's what helps kids to grow up and become more creative, which drives into the other prosperity stuff and the type of industries that we see in our area. Our public realm, we haven't done a great job on a lot of our public realm in Limerick, if we're being honest about it. And some of that comes down to lack of funding. Perhaps some of it comes down to a little bit of fear about trying new stuff. And I have shown a number of examples of stuff that has worked in other countries, and we could just copy them. And we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We can just bring that to Limerick. We need to sort out our transport, but this whole idea of building Limerick on a train system, we're here in Kilmallock, it could be a very important part of how Kilmallock could actually connect with the rest of Ireland and the rest of the world, given that we're literally on a train station that just needs to be added to the system. Nowhere better than Kilmallock to talk about valuing heritage assets. And thanks to John, who knows that I love medieval houses. My dad used to be a builder. There's a medieval mansion in the middle of this town that's just sitting there unused. This shouldn't be happening. I was in Askeaton yesterday, and the community council there had come up with this idea where they would put allotments as medieval gardens beside the old friary like they used to have, and they've been told that they're crazy. I think they're absolutely spot on. That is the kind of stuff we should be doing to make these places work, not just for tourists that come in, but actually for the people that live there themselves. And obviously, in the context of crazy gardens in Franciscan friaries in Askeaton, I clearly want a lot more fun in Limerick as well. Now, I won't go through all of these because otherwise we'll be here all night. But this is our more prosperity section. And essentially, these are the type of industries that I think can make Limerick work really well for everybody. And there's an interesting choice in the way I've done this is I think we talk about FDI all the time in Ireland when we talk about business. And I put it intentionally at the end. Not keeping the best wine to last necessarily, but because there's so much else to talk about before that, right? There's agriculture and food. There's our own SME businesses. There's this offshore wind opportunity. There's the use of artificial intelligence, which is this new technology that could play a huge role in the fortunes of some place in Europe that will embrace that, make it part of the way the city works, make it part of the way the school works, and bring that together with IT. There's manufacturing and engineering, where we had a fabulous conversation last week on this. There's this whole concept of retail and shops that are struggling in our towns and in our city centre that need to get support to actually work much better. Because who doesn't like a bit of shopping? I mean, you know, everybody does, but we've lost the fun, we've lost the experience of a lot of that in some of our areas, sometimes because we're just a bit afraid to walk around the streets at certain times. Supporting construction is clearly going to have to be important because we're going to need thousands and thousands of construction workers if we're going to do the housing that we need. Our tourism industry, what better, again, place to be talking about that than here in Kilmallock. But not just tourism with people coming in internationally who tend only to come to Ireland once anyway, but tourism that's domestic. Right? As I pointed out when I talked about tourism during the week when we were doing a focus on our tourism, the problem is that most national policymakers don't really have an important reason to care whether 100 euros is spent in Dublin or in Limerick, or even in Kilmallock. But the Mayor of Limerick cares whether it's spent in Kilmallock or in Dublin. And that's a really important part, but somebody who comes to Limerick to actually experience Limerick the first time and really enjoys it and lives in Cork or lives in Dublin is likely to come back numerous times and keep spending. So we should be focusing very much on an intra-Ireland tourism, which the national policy people don't really care about because it no longer adds any value to the country, whether these people spend in one part or the other. We have got to do a lot of work with our city centre in order to let some of that work. But the one I wanted to pick out actually was the creative industries, because I think that we are missing a trick, probably in most of the cities in Ireland, but certainly in our own. We have LSAD, we have a fashion industry, we have a film industry, we have a design industry, we have photographers, we have cameramen, we have a lot of the ingredients to have a really interesting creative industry, but then we're missing things like a cinema in the city centre. We're missing a place where our creative fashion people can actually work together and let us see what they do. Something that looks a bit like the Wickham Way, probably, but just for fashion. Right? And so all of these things can be done, and they're all within the power of a mayor to actually make these decisions. And the last one, which kind of flows into our other areas, something that perhaps you haven't heard other people talk about in this context, is this concept of leveraging the public wealth of a place. Now, people might immediately think, and it does apply to looking at derelict buildings, it does apply to actually the stock of social housing that you have as to whether you can actually draw a mortgage on that to actually build more, whether you can actually own housing that is rented as affordable rental. So after 20 or 30 years, you don't have a mortgage on it anymore, and it can actually be used to build more housing or subsidize new rent for people if as is happening at the moment, construction is too high, right? That's what Vienna does. And we all know how well that works in Vienna. So, of course, I won't be around to see the benefit of this if I get the chance of doing this. But if we can start building affordable housing in Limerick and own it ourselves rather than have investment funds or others own it, the rent that we pay in Limerick will actually go to pay down the cost of that, and we can keep it in the system. But importantly, the public wealth of Limerick is also tied to things like the education levels of all of its population. Just over 10% of the population of Limerick City have only got a primary school education, right? So when you put that together with the stuff, you realize how much power you can actually bring out of an area like Limerick by getting people higher up the educational trail, understanding digitization and everything else. And to do that, you need to monitor it, not by the CSO, but we need to monitor it ourselves here in Limerick. Now, our last pillar is this pillar, which is health. And it's ironic that we're having a conversation about health in the week when the entire media in Limerick are now talking about health again. And I think, for me, when you think about health, I remember an early interview about the mayor, and somebody says, well, the mayor has no powers about health, right? Because technically, under the legislation, that remains with Stephen Donnelly and the Department of Health and the HSE. But what I want to try and show tonight is just how much a mayor can actually do about health in Limerick. And the point is that if you think about health in these 4 buckets, you think about health much more broadly than our traditional way of thinking about it as acute treatment in UHL and the emergency room in UHL, which, as we all know, needs a serious shake-up in terms of how that runs, and we may talk about that a little bit later. But while public health infrastructure is important, we also have, as John mentioned, to change the way in which we do public health infrastructure and bring it much closer to the communities, using the primary care centres, so that actually we take the pressure off of the significant hospital, staff that we have. And at the moment, I think we have this transition that we're going through that we need to find some temporary solutions for to get us to a better place. But we also need to just simply look at stuff that's just stuck in the system and just drive it on. But for me, then, when you get beyond that thing that we talk about, and probably if you were to look at our newspapers and hear our radios and think about how much they talk about health, I think they kind of probably go there and go a little bit but not much further on, unless there's a significant incident, right? But the day-to-day issues of mental health that go on in our community are so significant. And there's so many things we can do ourselves as Limerick to actually drive that on. Ian, who'll talk later, has been a mind of great ideas, along with the other people I've talked about. And I've been so looking forward to this, digital detox. I feel like when I get to the end of this mayoral campaign, I want to certainly do something like a digital detox to get off Twitter and all of these other social medias. But these are really important points that we can actually take control of ourselves and do differently perhaps than the rest of the country, because we can do it better. Preventative health measures is a really important topic. The council plays a huge role. Because this isn't all about screening, although maybe some of that can be done, and we can take the lead on some screening initiatives here in Limerick by saying we have a directly elected mayor, we want to do things differently than the rest of the country. But it's about getting people out to do exercise. It's about getting people to mix with each other so that they actually are, believe it or not, staying younger and healthier just because they're actually doing that or doing exercise. The fact that they need to eat better, and that applies, and we're going to talk about that with Nadia later, when people are young, but it applies equally when they're old. I can see when I talk to people that a lot of older people are now living on their own, and it's no fun cooking for yourself. It's a very different experience doing that rather than cooking for a family or cooking just for a partner. And so you have a tendency to not eat as well and not eat good ingredients. And if you go all the way back to our agri and food stuff, what we want to have is Limerick people eating Limerick food. And if we can achieve that, we can actually do an awful lot of this preventative health. And the last one is the environmental health, which I must admit I kept to the very end because I knew I was going to be here and because we're right here beside Ballyhara, right? And Lochgar on the other side, right? These are resources, these are assets that are mostly underutilised, if I'm being honest, in Limerick. And we need to do an awful lot more to sort them out, to sort out the lake that I discovered in Rathkeil, which has been waiting to actually be put back as an angling group. I mean, there's just so many places, Curra Chase, even right in the city centre, there is acres and acres of land along the river that isn't used well for basically having a much more healthier environment for us all to live in. And so, I don't know whether you buy it or not, but I reckon if you can do 300 actions in those different areas, which is about 10 every one, over 5 years, to actually get to, through the 5 years, you can start us, and it'll only be starting us, on the road of Limerick becoming one of the most desirable places to live. And perhaps not even just in Ireland, but across Europe, because the talent that we actually want to keep in Limerick, and the talent we need to attract to Limerick, will be ranking us against places all across the European Union to see whether they want to live here or not. And I think there is a huge opportunity to do that. Now, the problem I have which is what this slide's about, is I need to get elected in order to actually do any of that. And thank you, John, for the strong words of support there at the beginning. But what I would like people that watch this to do, if they like what they hear, is over the course of the next week to contact 3 friends. And maybe even tell those friends to contact 3 friends. Because it's actually really tough the way the media have been handling this. The debates are only starting up now. We are going into debates next week, and I don't know what most of my competitors actually want to do. So it's like kind of I'm playing a game of 45 with my cards on the table, and they're all holding their cards up to not tell them. So we're going to have to do debates about that. So I think these conversations are probably the more meaningful one, but I need people to find out about them. I need people to understand what issues we're doing. Today, while you're here, we'll have the panel conversation. If you want to just send us a kind of a little tweet out or a retweet, please feel free to do so. Or just even afterwards, if we're talking about stuff. We are now taking a different day, a different policy kind of, subject matter every day. So this week we did tourism earlier in the week, we did retail, and we did agriculture and food. And we put all of the 10 or 15 items that we have just out during the course of the day. If you see that happening, please retweet them and let other people see them. They won't want to read all the detail, but they should at least start to understand the kind of a Limerick that we believe we can actually create if we all do this together. And then the last thing I have to ask you all to do is to vote number 1 for John Moran on the election day. And I'll leave that thought with you. I'll ask our panel to come up maybe here to the table. There's going to be a mic, we'll do it. John can sit, Ian will come up, and Eddie, wherever you feel comfortable. We're going to ask you the first question anyway, so you can...
Just if I may, there was something in the information. Sorry, in the information I sent you last night, which was quite late, as you understand, that I left off this by mistake. And as I was listening to John there, and please give me a minute or two to explain something that has practically happened in County Limerick with his participation in a European role, right? And I'll take you on this journey because you visited Below and Croom, right? And it's specifically Croom. There's a certain ex-CEO living below in Croom, and a number of years ago, the school, the ETB, had planning permission for a new school inside the hospital there. Access was a problem. Where the location of the school is, the new school is built now, it's actually outside, let's say, it's too far away from the town that the kids could come down onto the public road and walk in that what we know as the old road into Croom. So I was asked because at the time we had a planning application in for a primary care centre which is in Croom alongside the entrance to the hospital. It's built. We bought the site. To be fair, I am not a local government or political basher. I'm not, because that gets you nowhere, right? I suppose when I look at John, I look at him and say, he's an independent chairman that can kind of conduct the orchestra, that is the political parties with their councillors, and I'll come back to that. Again, maybe my minute is going to be 2 or 3 minutes, but hang in there, please. The chief executive and all his people who are isolated in the model that John showed nationally, and they need support, they do. Right? They're trying their best. Everybody's trying their best. The HSE have their infrastructure inside there, and whether people know it or not, up to a few years ago, there was a big issue that Croom Orthopaedic Hospital, which is the second biggest public orthopaedic hospital in the country, was going to be closed. Right? That was the situation. It was now COVID came. There's now new theatres in the hospital, etc. It's thriving. From our primary care centre, we have bought, you might have seen it, the 8.5 acres adjacent to the hospital and the Croom. We've bought that and are in discussions to put a very serious orthopaedic hospital in there with, to alleviate. There's 6,000 people waiting for operations in Croom Hospital. So we're going to go back to the central government, to the HSE, to the planners, and everybody needs to cooperate with ourselves to try and get this, right? And if there's somebody conducting all of that at local government level, which is what I would consider why I think you would be the person for it, John, it brings everybody together. But when we got our planning on the primary care centre, we built it. It had no road access into the school. The council got funding out of Europe, and I think the man on my left had something to do with that. So there's now a situation, if you look at it, there's a new road in, there's a whole new road infrastructure in Croom, and if anybody hasn't been down in Croom recently, there are houses being built all over the place, lads. There's Regeneron in the road and the whole lot, and I'd say Croom, from what is going to be one of the fastest growing towns, certainly a bit like Skibbereen down in West Cork because of Ludgate and that. But that all came about from, as I say, a certain individual getting people together, knocking their heads together and said, how are we going to resolve getting a road into the school? The school, the primary care centre, all the work, all came about a little group coming together, and there was an independent chairperson to that group, and the council took sense. And I think if we have that on other projects, we'll achieve a lot more. And no criticism to the political parties. Our purchase of the land, subject to planning, got the support from all the local councillors and from all the councillors because they thought it was a good project. We are very well represented with local councillors here, all of whom are friends of mine, right? But I personally, and this is personal because I know I might get some criticism from him, I do not want to see a mayor from one of the political parties where he has his own people around the table. I just don't think it'll work. I'll stand up that argument, that's a personal argument. I just wanted to explain that Croom has driven on thanks to
no problem.
The money being found.
Well, money always delivers. That's why I think the budget is such an important point. But thank you for that. But I think it's the important point that I suppose I've been reiterating since the beginning, which is this concept that the mayor has to work with everybody and has to get a budget agreed by the councillors. And therefore, the risk of a logjam if you have a mayor from one political party and council basically controlled by a different political party is a huge problem, potentially, or a landmine here in Limerick that we have to avoid. And then equally, I think, in terms of the conversations and the advocacy for Limerick to the national government, it's important that the mayor has the freedom to speak for Limerick first, and equally is not sort of, a sworn political enemy of somebody that you're actually asking to give something to Limerick first. So that's why, in terms of my own view, certainly as well, and John, I'm glad you agree that the independence of the mayor is actually a really important aspect of the characteristics of the right person. I'm going to start, if I can, with you, because I know you and I talk about a subject matter that's really important to me, which is this concept that in schools in areas around Limerick, kids kind of start the day badly because their families don't understand the importance of actually, nutrition and food, and how a local authority, and indeed led by the right sponsorship from a mayor, can actually try and intervene with that. But I think you might give us 1 or 2 minutes to just remind everybody who's watching about why that's important, because you've studied this stuff. So you're the expert in the room here.
Is this on? Yeah. Good. Hi everyone. So actually, I'm doing my research paper on food poverty in all of Ireland, but my research is based on Limerick City and County. So unfortunately, 1 in 5 children go to school or go to bed hungry every single night throughout all of Ireland. And I spent 5 months working with Paul Partnership, which is a community development organisation, where we used to go into schools and we used to talk about nutrition and healthy eating. And what we found was that they've started the rollout of hot meals in primary schools, mostly in desk schools in Limerick City. Now, by 2025, they're hoping that this will be wide around Ireland, not just upon desk schools. But these kids go to school every morning and they haven't had a breakfast. You can't expect these kids to sit in class, to learn, to engage if you're starving, if you're sitting there. You're cold, they're more susceptible to illness, which means that they're in and out of doctors, and then that adds waiting lists and GPs as well. So what, as a community home economist, which is my role, or will be in 2 weeks' time once I have all the assignments submitted, would be it's early intervention, but not only to inform teachers and students, but also their parents, that their kids need to be having a healthy breakfast every morning, they need a packed lunch, but also that some of these families aren't aware of the nutritional importance within our healthy eating guidelines and within the food pyramid. It is new information, unfortunately, and that is what I would be doing, is rolling out healthy eating plans and things like the food pyramid, making students, parents aware of our food pyramid, of programs such as Healthy Food Made Easy, which is run out by the government and it's run through Sláinte Care. It's a healthy eating initiative where they look at nutrition, they look at cookery, but they also look at budgeting and meal planning. Unfortunately, a lot of this is being run in the city, so I would love to see this in the County Limerick, in the likes of Camalla, Croom, Bruff, and just to bring it out further in Limerick.
Okay. Well, I know, I mean, I spend a little bit of time with, there's an organisation for people who don't know it called St. Munchin's inside in town, where Linda Ledger does amazing work. But what I've done when I've gone on some of these mornings with her and the staff to Corpus Christi is that, and again, I keep like trying to draw all of this together in terms of people understanding, is that it's actually not just about the learning experience, right? I can see the kids looking forward to that half an hour in the morning because they're getting together, potentially out of an environment that may be less conducive to having fun with other friends and stuff like that. And so you're actually using food in so many other ways. And again, in our policy document, I've said we should go one step further and try and actually, in terms of the cooking classes and everything else for food, is let's use Limerick ingredients. You know, rather than bringing stuff from across the world, we use Limerick ingredients and we try and get rid of one of the other scourges that's happening is the packaging. As to how it works. And I think, you know, you can kind of pull all these together and create, because if you can get to these kids at that age, you are creating, you're not just touching one kid, you're actually touching an entire pyramid of people going forward. Now that overlaps with mental illness, which I know, Ian, you and I have been talking about a lot. You can't walk around Limerick without seeing the issues there. We've put a bunch of issues in there. Is there one or two of the initiatives that you think that could really kind of make a start that Mayor should really get behind? And then if any of my other candidates that might, you know, want to be listening, they want to copy it, I'm more than happy for them to copy the policy action, because I won't have to debate the value of it next.
I suppose looking at this, the main one that I liked inside in your third pillar was getting an innovation hub. That was one of the main ones, getting the organisations in Limerick to coordinate their I suppose, attack towards the issue in the city. Like, as most people are probably aware, Limerick has, and sorry to depress people here now Thursday, Limerick has probably the highest suicide rates in Limerick for the last 5 years. An example for our own services with Limerick Mental Health, we went from 860 interactions with people in 2022 to 5,583 in 2023. That's a 520% increase. Like, I was nearly late myself this evening because as I was leaving the office, we had a crisis walk-in. It's constant. So if we could coordinate services for a stronger and more coordinated, I suppose, approach towards people, that would be one of the main initiatives. I also like the way you mentioned inside with pocket parks. We have multiple pocket parks. I'll give an example, Parnell Street. We all know from the train station, there's 2 million people a year pass that small pocket park on the corner of Parnell Street, Sexton Street. It's an empty space. We're going back to food there just to link in. We had an initiative where we called it a feast on the street. We got all the different cultures, we got a community, we got together. Everyone brought their own food. And as you know, we're all human, we're a social species. The biggest thing for mental health is socialising. And from surveys, that's what we got. It's one of our main approaches towards mental health. Nearly everything we do is around socialising. So if we could get stronger communities through food initiatives, through coordinating the services much better towards increasing the environment for, as we say, promoting positive mental health, that would be a great start towards any initiative going forward.
Okay. I noticed that one of the things, the ideas you gave me, which I think is a really good idea, is this concept that I hadn't heard before of mental health first aid training, so that you actually understand when and are trained to recognise some of the signs that sometimes people don't see.
Yes, so there is mental health first aid training, but to start off, there's also, I don't know if anyone has ever heard of it, we have Safe Talk, which has been launched throughout every community in Ireland. So we're training everyone in the communities to recognise depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts, social isolation. They're the four biggest things at the moment. And from there you can go on to assist. And from there you also have mental health first aid. So if you have people in every community across Limerick, across Ireland, you would help reduce the rates of, we'll go with suicide because it's the biggest issue at the moment in Limerick. And don't be afraid. It'll encourage people to spot the signs, link in with their neighbour, approach their neighbour, and not be afraid to say, listen, I've noticed changes. Are you feeling suicidal? It's the biggest thing in Ireland at the moment. We do not mention it. Even here, I'm probably making people feel uncomfortable by mentioning the word, to be honest. There's still a big stigma around it going forward in Ireland. But that training, I believe, is the basics and the essentials that should be brought out across all communities.
Okay. That's like, well, it's a really, I mean, but I do think if we can be more positive in the sense of understanding everybody has a bad day, right? So it's just that sort of, you know, as you say, the stigma and just actually do it. So I have to lead by doing the training in the first week, right? So you'll be lining me up. Can I ask you one question before I go to John, which relates to the point about the city and the county, right? So how do we make sure that the best practices that we're perhaps developing in what seems like a bigger crisis just because of the density of population in the city can be carried over and used in the county? Because I imagine isolation, I mean, I kind of worry about that in terms of rural areas with people that are getting older in rural areas, and that isolation and loneliness must be a huge problem there. And can we take, is there a way to leverage off of work that's been done in the city to make it work in places?
It's actually one of our focus points that you have mentioned as well inside. So I like your idea you have put down inside there as well, is mobile mental health units. Great idea. Because we have some areas in the city where people would be reluctant to come into services. They mightn't be able to travel into services. You don't know the situations for people. So if we had mobile vans with qualified professionals like you're having there, and we went out to each area, we linked in with each area, and let's say if Kilmallock were here, if we said we'd be out here every Tuesday, we were in Bruff every Wednesday, we were in Croom every Thursday, and we got around the entire county once a week. You're bringing the services to the people. One, you're combating social isolation. Number two, you're actually helping the people that might be afraid to come out of the house. There's other avenues you can approach as well, but with that plan that's inside the pillar there, it's ideal. It's a perfect way to approach it. So mobile units with main word is qualified personnel, getting out and linking in.
Yeah, because one of the things I've discovered, this really healthy network of sheds across Limerick that particularly you see a lot in some of the rural areas or the smaller towns. And I think if you kind of hook all this up, it would be probably really powerful. I'm going to talk about hooking up in terms of just repeating again some of the obstacles that you explained to me about the primary care centres that we should have. And I suppose for everybody's benefit, this is a sort of a new model of health, right, where you get help more locally than just going to the UHL, and therefore it takes the pressure off everywhere. But I know, John, you were saying there's a couple of roadblocks in the way.
And again, I'm kind of giving a health signal with what I'm saying, that some of the stuff that I'll say in a minute, there's the HSE are involved, the local government are involved, etc. And it's no one thing is kind of delaying or stopping the infrastructure being built, right? It could be funding the banking system here in Ireland where somebody has planning permission, but you know, what's actually happened is building construction pricing has gone up. There's one project we're involved in the last 6 months, the cost of building it has gone up by €500,000. Right? Now, if you decide something 2 years ago and you get a HSE contract to build it, you do it on getting an agreed rent, okay? If there's a situation, like obviously there's profit built in on it, so when you hand it over, you get paid. But if there's a case, there's a movement of €500,000, what it actually means is that project doesn't get built, irrespective of planning permission, etc. If you don't give the people who have the money a return, they do not give you the money, right? As you well know, right? Just a couple of things on what Ian said, if I may. In the primary care centres, we have seen that HSE services are now adding mental health requirements. So they're coming and saying it's not just physical. So we have an More in our one, which is not built, by the way. They came and said we want 6,000 square feet for child and adult mental health services, okay? Because it's not built, there's treatment that isn't done, right? We have nearly every primary care centre to be built is going to have a mental health space for mental health where the HSE staff can see the service. So that's a positive thing, right? Just to be clear, just to say that. It's a very welcome development. We'll deal with the infrastructure. We're very lucky here. We have a day hospital and we have another unit here, and they're quite secluded and quite private, and because they're in the town, people have an asset that they, right? You have now got in our local town here, primary care centre, 20,000 square feet, where we used to have only, but say, 1.5 GP practice. We've now got a 4 GP practice in the building. So you can just sense how many more people are being seen, how they're being treated. You know, it's not quite same day, but it's maybe next day, depending, of course, if there's an emergency, you'd be seen in an emergency. One of the issues, and again, it's kind of for Limerick City and County, Rathkeale is to have a primary care centre. That is a HSE policy. It's just not been advertised yet, right? I'm just leaving that hanging there. Ennis Road is to have a 60,000 square foot primary care centre with the GPs committed to going into it. For various reasons in the process, the site hasn't been found suitable because the zoning was wrong. But the zoning was wrong by the promoter from day one. They just thought they could change the system. But what has happened is delayed a primary care centre on the Ennis Road that 11 GPs were going to move into, right? Now it's being re-advertised again, and it will happen, but it's going to happen maybe 8 years later than when it started.
So it's the same story of like things just
It is, but it's kind of in a way a perfect storm as well. And the last one then, and again, your question to me was around health, and this is an area I'm in, etc., etc. There is planning permission for a 55,000 square foot primary care centre on the car park of the South Court Hotel, which includes a bit of the South Court at the back. If you're all familiar with Ryan Centra, etc., there's a building there right across the road, planning permission, but the problem was the guy who decided he was going to build it paid too much for the site, and now his commercial model doesn't work. But what does that take? That takes people getting into a room and saying, lads, how are we going to build this? It might mean that there's a contribution from local government to make it happen. But it doesn't matter. The solution has to be found to make it happen. This is right across the road from the hospital, lads.
Yeah, okay.
Right? And just lastly then, I wanted to say, one of the things we pushed locally for with the local fire station, and Greg Conway and everybody, and we're all familiar, he was the fire chief, was to have an active ambulance base in Kilmallock to serve the likes of Anglesborough, Kilbehenny. There's 10 paramedics living within 10 minutes of Kilmallock. They're all being administered or managed out of Tala. And unfortunately, for whatever reasons that I don't know, we have a situation where down the primary care centre, there's a 2-bay ambulance base with 300 square foot of space, accommodation for the paramedics and that, say, to come in. So there was always supposed to be an ambulance there with people, crew on standby, who would get within the golden hour up to Anglesborough, that if somebody had a cardiac arrest. We fought for that with the support of the community. The fire station wanted it next door to us, because in the previous 18 months at the time, 3 people died locally because the ambulance didn't get to them in time, and that came from the local GP. Yeah. And all I'm saying is, joined up thinking between the agencies, and particularly in communities, can address the likes of what Nadia mentioned about the kids here. You know, kids have been kind of fed in Kilmallock, I believe, but that's coming from an initiative of a neighbour.
Yeah. So one of the questions, and I want to open it to the audience in terms of questions, right, is so one of the recommendations, because I'm big on governance and delivery, right, is one of the things that surprises me as I've been watching this is that the HSE, which is effectively, you know, an organisation based in Dublin, even though the CEO is actually from Limerick, which is fortunate for the next point I'm about to make. The hospital has a local CEO, but I don't see them actually account for their progress or not to the councillors of Limerick. So one of the things I've actually recommended is that if elected as mayor, that I will invite them, They probably won't like to come in, but I think they actually owe it to the people of Limerick to come in and explain what they're going to be doing. I mean, their annual plan, the delivery against that plan, quarterly to the mayor, first of all, because it allows us a full time to actually really get on top of the issues. But to present that to the local council and to the councillors in the same way as they will present that to a subcommittee of the Dáil in the first place, they should be accountable locally here in Limerick. And so this is kind of letting the cat out of the bag, but it's now on our website. But I think that there is an obligation on these major agencies, the Land Development Agency being a similar one, that have a really big part to play in where Limerick is going, to actually come and talk to the councillors in a sort of potentially a public...
I actually think that, I disagree with you that they mightn't like being asked. I'd actually think that if they're being invited into something that comes up with a solution, and there's somebody there that is not, let's say, interdepartmental.
Yeah. Well, I hope because
there's a conductor, and that's or a chairman, and that's
that's the Cahill in this case. Yeah.
Then it'll happen, and the solution will flow from it.
Because I describe it as a joint accountability. Because in a way, the local authority have to be accountable to them for the delivery of their part of the problem, as much as the HSE have to deliver theirs. And therefore, this forum which actually sets the deadlines and works it through, and then has a proper meeting, to do that, I think would be important. Can I throw it open to the audience, just in case there's any other questions? And we'll just probably take a couple of questions in the panel.
I just want to welcome you to Kilmallock, John. You're in good company, I believe. Daniel O'Connell spoke here, and Charles Stewart Parnell, I believe, was able to get to train and had 2 bands, so you might think of that the next time you're coming to Kilmallock. So that's a bit of history for you. But my main problem is the railway station in Kilmallock and the bureaucracy I've met over the last 5 years to try and get something done with it. A derelict site notice was served in that station 4 years ago, and only last year a few slates were changed. Now, I believe things are changing. I've gone to every political party. I agree with John. I want to see someone outside the political system getting mayor. I think we'd be better served. And a lot of people are thinking along the same lines, because we've been fed the same kind of, from county development plans, lovely rosy signs in it, this will be developed like an asset to the town, the railway station. I have a programme here, and the last time a train stopped in Kilmallock was the 19th of February 1995, just going to Thurles. Now, the station was closed in 76. It stopped for the Pope's visit. There was a factory here in town, Neodata. They were able to book the train. And it's been a shame that Kilmallock people have not been able to celebrate the last 4 or 5 All-Irelands and someone look into the feasibility of Kilmallock. There's a station above in Killucan, and it's taken 20 years to get a feasibility study, which has been done, but of course, bureaucracy again, it's not been released. I feel sorry for them. But like here in Kilmallock, there's 30 trains passing every day. Some of them have only 2 or 3 carriages. And that's even the quiet time. I can remember I was on the train that day in 1994, but like the station had fallen apart at that stage. But nothing has been done with that station. And there's a man here of a picture, Francis Kennedy, used to park his bus. At least he used it for something. There was a hole in the side of that station for the last 20 years, and they put a net over it and put more. And I've been on to all the TDs in County Limerick, and the same old mantra. You get a letter back from the boss in Dublin or the Minister for Transport. He refers it on to the Minister. The Minister refers it on to Jim Mead, the CEO, and you get the same ding-dong, population density and all this crack. But as I point out, it grieves me to see Bantier, Mill Street, all getting in new platforms, and we here in Kilmallock have nothing. Because I know for a fact, I went up to Dublin 6 or 7 years ago, went out to Connolly Station and asked them what were they doing with Kilmallock. And I was told Kilmallock is a great place for the workers. They come in there, they're doing loads of work up there at the moment. I don't know what they're doing along the tracks, but like they just say that Kilmallock is a great place. And I hear that the Red Cross, I hope someone takes it over and does something, but like I can't see why an unmanned station can be put in there unless, just to finish now, according to the CEO of Irish Rail, and this is to do with the Ryder Cup, temporary platforms can be put into Adair, no problem. I want to ask the question, could temporary platforms in the meantime, be put into Kilmallock and use the mart which adjacent, which has 1,000 probably 700 or 800 car spaces along with Adair. If they can do it in Adair, and well look to Adair, but I'm saying Jim Mead, the CEO, they look after their heritage. That's not the case in Kilmallock. But like if they can put in, like if he says there's no problem putting in temporary platforms, I don't know whether the station would be able for it now, but I'd like someone to answer the question. Okay, so the best to look to you, and I hope it's someone non-political that gets into the role, and the best to look to you. You're in good company.
Thank you.
Take care.
Well, look, I suppose just to comment a little bit on the concept of trains, right? So there, for the last round of train analysis, because I've been pushing trains, at least in the suburban Limerick area, out to Adair, out to Foynes, and indeed Ennis and Tanina, because they were the ones I was more familiar with, and actually it's only when I'm starting to come around you see the Kilmallock potential is there. I think we need to bring a couple of different threads together, okay? So the first is that the next round of the National Development Plan and what happens in Waterford, where they actually set the structural funds and the infrastructure for the southern part of Ireland, which is basically South Leinster and Munster. That needs to be in there for it to actually really become a government priority. So in terms of actually how you get things done, I did a submission back in 2018, 2019 to that, when very few people were talking about trains, and we got language into that about the commuter train system in Limerick and indeed the connection to Shannon, based on our submissions. And that then sets in motion a conversation that it becomes national policy so that the local plan here can actually have that. Jim has a bias, as you know, to... Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, can I ask you just one question before I go? Like, you and we'll say the CEO, Pat Daly writes off on the county development plan, take note. Who is actually going to be in charge? What is the remit of the job between yourself and Pat Daly?
Yeah, so that's what I was going to say. So the first thing is that exercise down in Waterford now, we now have the mayor that actually goes to those meetings to lobby effectively for what should happen in the southern region for the next iteration. That will then feed into the local development plan. So in a sense, you can do things in the local development plan as long as they're not prohibited by the let's call it the Southern Regional Assembly one, but you can't do things that are prohibited in that. So it's a hierarchy that comes down. So it's really important to get up the chain in a way to get it right. And that's why actually attendance at those meetings should be obligatory, and the mayor should be watched to make sure they do, as should the three councillors that are here in Limerick. I presented to it one day about the potential of Limerick using that diagram I just mentioned, and sadly on that day none of the three Limerick councillors were there to defend me, and I was being beaten up by the guys from Cork about the idea, this heresy of saying that Limerick could actually do as well or better than Cork over a while, right? So these are really important stuff. It's hard for people to actually kind of understand the way the structure works, but when you're lobbying for this, you expect the councillors to have worked that out. You expect certainly your mayor to be able to understand that, to advise communities about how to do it. I would still be positive about the train station here, probably more positive now than any other time in the past, right? And the other reason is that if you go back to what I said about the power or the potential of Limerick, one of the things we're recommending in these documents is that every significant town would do a 10-year plan. So it would go beyond the development plan. And they would focus on what I call their unique selling points are. So what makes a town in Limerick different from another town? And the train station here is exactly on everything that the European Union wants to do, everything that the national government wants to do, which is to have people travelling by public transport, ideally trains and others, because there's a great advantage with a train. If you take a train from Kilmallock into the city centre of Limerick, let's say, you can take a bike on it. So when you arrive, you can actually take your bike across. You can't take a bike on a bus, or at least if you do, not very many other people can take a bike on a bus. So if you have the infrastructure, I say use it. You know.
Well, I just one more thing to say. People from Kilmallock that have no transport, they have no way. Half my family are living in Dublin. They're driving down here every now and they're all getting older. Some of them have never learned to drive. So like it makes it harder for people to
when you're talking to the converted, I mean,
yeah,
you know,
like,
I mean,
there's no one expecting 4 or 5 trains to stop in Kilmallock
yeah.
and the station to open. It's a stop an unmanned stop or whatever.
No, but that's really possible and feasible to do. And really the other power of trains in terms of building up towns is that people don't have to own a car anymore. And they can actually then, people who were working in the city centre that want to live out in Kilmallock or vice versa, you can actually get people backwards and forwards in ways that's not possible at the moment.
Before LMS Mats in Limerick, I read there last week, I think there's 11 or 12 stations in Cork. They're going to add 3 or 4 more. Tipperary, there's 9 or 10. Kerry, 4. And Clare,
but
2.
This comes down to this selection in this election, right? That's one of the reasons why I'm running, right? Because I have been at that other conversations arguing for the train system in Limerick. And it wasn't in the original LS Mats at all, because trains don't belong to, there's a structural issue in Dublin in terms of the people that were running the LS Mats. And it was only because the people of Limerick actually pushed to have trains that it became part of the second version. And so we just need to keep pushing on these kind of things. And
well, it's just to redress the balance. Like, you've only Castleconnell, like, how on earth does Limerick only Colbert Street? And they have a lovely job done in Colbert Street that was in there last week, and I would use it a lot more for buses and trains.
Yeah.
They have a fine job done there at the moment, but this is the kind of infrastructure that people need.
That's right. Well, we all agree. Yeah. So let's go to another question. I suspect that there's a question coming at me.
Can I just help Peter with something? Because Peter, you can sense, I know Peter's, it's a passion for him, and it is. I was involved in early days. Just one thing on a physical aspect. We unfortunately, about 6 or 9 months ago, suffered the loss of Glenfield Engineering above. So in another life as a solicitor in town, I acted for that company in the purchase of their yard, which is at part of the train station, Peter, right? No, but this is what I'm coming to.
Why do we won't actually sort out...
No, just very quickly. All I'm saying is practically, the solution is there now to have a situation where trains can stop both ways. Coming back, whereas it wasn't because the engineering firm... So, out of one loss, we need to turn it into an opportunity.
But I think some of the idea about the analysis that we do for public transport has to be the forward-looking one. It's the power of a change like that to actually transform a city or a town like Kilmallock, rather than actually looking at it on the current state. And that's been a fallacy and a mistake in the way they've looked at a lot of things.
You lose your history as well, for people have memories and things.
Yeah.
These are things are important.
Absolutely.
Sisters living down in Waterford, our memories of running the train, get going on.
Okay, let's leave the train for a minute and we'll just go. You can talk to me afterwards. You have this question, Nicola.
Don't think you'd hear me otherwise. So I'd just like to reflect on a couple of the points that the panel have raised and you've raised in your presentation, John, that the aspect of food poverty, and I know, Nadia, you've been specifically speaking to the child element, but it's across all ages, and it's surprising as to what households that might look that they've no problem getting in the food, they're actually struggling. But I'd like to speak specifically to, and this goes to the bigger point I'd like to make about, and this is where I think taking the concept of the conductor that John has been referring to there as mayor, the siloed aspect of how so many, in fact, I'd go so far in a personal capacity of saying all public services work. Everybody's looking after their own office, their own department, their own project. And I see your comment. Yeah, we've all encountered, as you said, obstacles, not necessarily individually made and certainly inadvertently in so many cases. But if we could just break out of the siloed action, siloed thinking, and start looking at the bigger picture, as you say, of where all of the elements of health, be it food, nutrition, access to quality but affordable food, and in a way that is accessible to anybody of any age or any circumstance. And in particular, and I'm going to specifically, you mentioned Croom earlier, but I sat at a table with a host of agencies at the Croom FRC, and I'm just going to use them as an example, but we could all think of so many more. The FRC had been inundated with the need for a Meals on Wheels service and a food bank. they cannot, in their own programming costs, sustain the delivery of any of that. They don't actually have the means and capital infrastructure to cook food on site and prepare meals. The volunteers are available to take out to rural houses, older people, infirm people, whatever. So they called a meeting, and members of various offices from the council attended, councillors and even 2 TDs turned up, and members of various offices of the HSE, Meals on Wheels, National Service, and a host of other places, okay, including Ballyhowra were asked. The explanations were given of the problems, the need defined, and everybody said, yes, there's something has to be done. But the FRC were fundamentally saying we need programme operating costs to coordinate this and to make it happen. We need access to the food, the meals themselves, and we need a delivery system. And ideally, in the longer term, we would like to build a kitchen on site. We have the space, okay? And we'd create a community kitchen. That's a part 2, but right now we have need of food, and they were given access that food could be made available as part of the Meals on Wheels kitchens in Limerick. Wonderful, you'd say. But they can't operate that even from an administrative on the shoestring that they're already operating on the FRC. So a number of people left that room with the understanding from the conversations that I got on that there would probably be, and there should be funding made available from the HSE. And people from the HSE thought, yeah, that should probably be the case. We'll go back and check about it. And other people from other offices in the council thought similarly. 3 or 4 weeks on, the manager of FRC has been back on to me saying, Claire, you've talked to anybody, can you get money? How are we going to keep this operating? They officially opened their service this week, literally on thread. I wouldn't even call it a shoestring, because they're running out on the basic resources that they're having to then not do some of the other services that they would offer, and again, are overstretched for the demand they have. So I would just give that as an example of, despite efforts, despite meetings, despite talk, despite apparent solutions, they're still where they were 6 weeks ago when they called the meeting. And the people, they've over 60 people, and they stopped taking in orders, screaming for food to be delivered to their houses just 2 days a week, but they get 4 days dinners handed to them. And think of, you talk about social isolation, you talk about food nutrition, you talk about the fact that if I don't have a healthy meal and I'm not having any degree of social interaction, you talk about Anglesborough. I sat on the Connecting for Life panel in the HSE and all the services there. And I gave the example, and I used Anglesborough and Glenberhan as well, because that's where the hub came out of in Glenberhan, was because of the high rate of suicides in that small rural hillside little community. But the point I'm making is that, again, what help is it to even phone the help numbers when you mightn't even have signal, or you mightn't have phone credit, you know?
But in terms of actually trying to think about this, right? So just to try and explain it, and just to kind of, the structure that I've tried to do is something I did in the Department of Finance, because that was an incredibly siloed organisation. And I'm trying to do, effectively, the main headings are all cross-cutting, because we don't have a department of livability in the HSE. We don't have a department of a lot of equal opportunity in the Limerick City Council, right? So the idea is, as a management exercise and a reporting exercise, that lots of people contribute to some of these solutions because they're holistic. And so by having that, you actually have to get everybody involved in the solution. So that's the first thing about that. I think the second thing is, as I said earlier, I think that the HSE and Limerick City Council at the highest levels need to be combining. Because I'm sure there's lots of staff they're going to meetings and actually frustrated that things aren't moving as well. So we go back to the sort of, the idea that the HSE CEO and the mayor should meet every quarter. To actually make sure that stuff isn't just sitting around in the system, not being, or that if it's coming down the tracks, that there's an identification of it early enough to be put into the budgets of whichever of the two organisations is there. So I think, hopefully with that, we can actually do it. Will I leave it?
Just add on, there's one other point, and it goes to the aspect of programming costs. the number of services, and often run by community volunteers, but even where there are the likes of mental health services, FRCs and others, whereby they can't actually deliver to the level of need that there is, because they just don't have programming operating costs.
Okay. Can I just raise an important point, because there is a budget that the mayor gets every year that's programmed into the system. At the moment, it's 7 million or so, right? And I think some people are... Sorry? That's for Kilmallock, yeah. See, he's tough, this guy, right? But I think a lot of people are assuming that that might actually be used for capital infrastructure, you know, building a playground or whatever else. And if you tread through the document, the 3 documents that I've actually produced, right, you'll see that I'm using little bits of that funding to do the feasibility studies and everything to look for more money, rather than just actually building more capital buildings that we don't have the structure. Because actually, that's the huge amount of money that is managed up in Dublin through the system that I mentioned earlier. And so actually doing that. Might just quickly, because I can say, and we'll leave it at that.
I just wanted to echo that point about capital funding and revenue funding. I worked for 25 years for my sins in the voluntary and charitable and arts sectors in one way or another. I currently work for Ballyhara, but I'm here in my personal capacity. The amount of organisations doing incredible work who are bending over backwards to try and find revenue funding, but being offered capital or project specific, you know, no, we can't fund your ongoing project, but we could fund a nice shiny new one. Well, actually, the ongoing project's delivering brilliant work. We don't need a nice shiny new one. We need to be able to continue running this one. So I would urge you, if you're going to be giving out a mayoral pot and any kind of grant, please, please, please give revenue. Please look at unrestricted, and please look at funding overheads for organisations working in that sector.
Can I add another one to that, which is one that frustrates me, is that it's not multi-year.
Absolutely.
Right? Is that the fact that you get funding for 1 year and you don't know if you have it the following year is a huge issue across the whole system. I mean, I fought this at the centre of government.
Completely.
And
also staffing costs are not overheads.
Yeah.
Staff are delivering on the ground and they need to be paid.
Okay. So will I leave it at that, if that's okay? Can I thank the panel? First of all, you might give them all a round of applause. I'm sure they'll be around for a couple of minutes afterwards, and in particular, if you want to sort of, you know, tease out the 2 or 3 experts that are here, ask them the questions rather than me. I'm just going to thank everybody for coming again tonight, and for those who are logging on to watch the video, thank you for watching that. We've kind of come to the end of our 3, you know, sessions of policies now. It makes it easier for people to understand that they knit together in different ways. So when you look at a pillar, just be careful. That's not all the policy actions that are in that relate to a particular area, but they have to be popped into one box or the other. But for the reason I described, I think the reason for putting them in these kind of broad parameters is because I don't like this idea that while somebody's got to be accountable to deliver everything, you don't want people switching off in a meeting when they actually think they've done their piece and not the piece where you need them to do everything else. I reiterate the point I made earlier about the need for people to talk to their friends and explain it. This is a complicated role. Really appreciate the attention tonight to try and understand the intricacies of it. And I think the story is starting to get out a little bit better in the last couple of weeks. Most politicians told me that actually, because I don't know how to do this, you know, that the last 4 weeks are the most intense, and it gets really important. But it's such a complicated role that, you know, we can't have the next 4 weeks talking about UHL or Barrington's. We have to talk about some of the stuff we talked about in this room today, and just the way in which actually funding gets used to leverage in other stuff, and the way you manage staff, and the way you do all the other things. And I suppose the last point to leave everybody to remind them is that I think our politicians are often used to looking for things. You know, they're sort of elected as councillors to look for something. They're elected as TDs to look for something. This is a very different executive role. This is the politician that we're going to elect to decide which of the asks are more important than others. And that's a much tougher job, to actually be able to decide against what policy works, what policy doesn't work, where priorities are, which place works. You have this complex web of things that you have to kind of keep in your mind and keep the thing. But ultimately what you're doing is you're trying to distribute what is at the end of the day, a finite pot of cash amongst very many more projects that people would like to do and make those decisions. And so I think, again, it's really important that people sort of understand that in the context of, that's why finding 10,000 euros or 20,000 euros in a budget while managing it really carefully can be hugely valuable to keep one of, you know, those projects alive, or to get some sort of, you know, stuff going for volunteers. So I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much again for coming. I think you know I'm passionate about this role. I think you know I'm passionate about Limerick. And thanks to the people in this room, I'm now passionate about Kilmallock as well. Although you're not getting all the money, John, you're going to have to be a bit more generous. So we'll be around for a bit, have a cup of tea. Margaret has given us our best biscuits, so we should definitely, you know, take advantage of that. Thank you very much.